Ready to head into both the Grishaverse and Wizarding World? We knew there had to be a reason Ben Barnes compared his series, Shadow and Bone, to Harry Potter. Well, we did a little research and, spoiler alert, he was right. Prepare to fall out of your chair when you hear some of the similarities we found between the stories of the Sun Summoner and the boy who lived.
As magic.
Right away, you see that both main characters, Alina and Harry, are orphans. Sure, Harry didn't live in an actual orphanage like Alina did, but they both lost their parents at a young age. Ironically, their parents also died for similar reasons, while fighting the darkness. Alina's were lost to the Fold, and Harry's to Voldemort and his Death Eaters. Of course, because they were orphans, both never realized the power they held within. Is it just us, or do they have the same premise so far?
The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter.
We all know how Harry liked to use his Chosen One status.
But I am the chosen one.
But deep down we know that his prophecy isn't the life he would have chosen for himself. Being the only one able to defeat Voldemort and save the Wizarding World is probably something he could have lived without. The same goes for Alina, who was deemed as the Sun Summoner, Saint, and you guessed it, Chosen One. The whole first half of Season 1 is her denying that she is the only one who can take down the Fold. She would trade the Little Palace's riches and glories just to be running around in the army with Mal. They both unintentionally become celebrities, and quite frankly, the most important wizard and Grisha in their respective worlds.
The Stag chose me.
There is huge symbolism surrounding the Stag in Shadow and Bone. The Stag is one of the Morozova beasts that would help amplify Alina's already powerful magic. However, throughout the series, it also acted as a beacon of light in her life, and something she had been envisioning since she was a child. Harry certainly didn't get a stag's bones magically placed underneath the skin of his collarbone, but it was the shape of his Patronus. In both films, the Stag was a form of powerful light magic that assisted in getting rid of the darkness, also known as the Fold and Dementors. Overall, the Stags in both films just create such similar imagery. If we didn't know any better, we'd guess they were shots from the same fictional world. Just take a look. Ah, fantasy series and their love for having manifestations of darkness. It never gets old, but in Harry Potter and Shadow and Bone, the darkness looks a little too similar for us to believe it was purely coincidental. The Fold was created by the Darkling Alexander after he channeled dark and forbidden magic, just like how Voldemort used forbidden magic to create the Horcruxes in order to make himself immortal. But these Horcruxes were often life-threatening to everyone else, just like the Volcra creatures created by the Fold. Let's take a closer look at the Fold and what's inside a Horcrux. They're basically identical.
You should have stayed and cut it down.
At the end of Season 1, Alina thinks they've overtaken the Darkling, but she couldn't be more wrong. We get to see that he's actually alive and stronger than ever and ready to lead an entire army to battle. Sound familiar? Yup. It's just like when the Wizarding World thought one-year-old Harry had defeated Voldemort. But he was actually very much alive with an army of Death Eaters ready to support him when he made his comeback. Whether or not Alina wins like Harry did has still yet to be seen. We just hope people believe he's back, unlike how Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge acted about Voldemort.
That's quite clever.
Has there ever been a myth or tale in a fantasy franchise that didn't turn out to be real? Alina being the Sun Summoner was a myth, and yet, here we are. But we want to talk about the myth of the Morozova beasts again. These were animals said to hold such powerful magic that they'd be able to elevate a Grisha's power like never seen before. We couldn't help but compare that to the story of the Peverell brothers in Harry Potter, also known as the Deathly Hallows. You have the Invisibility Cloak, Elder Wand, and the Resurrection Stone. Possessing all three made a wizard basically immortal, and just like Shadow and Bone, the most powerful wizard. Not to mention, they play a key role in defeating Voldemort, and is the way to defeat the Fold once and for all. So, does this mean there's still hope we'll one day receive a Hogwarts letter? Hogwarts is home, and also the safest place to be in the Wizarding World. We know that because it's said many times throughout the Harry Potter series.
That help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it.
Because of its enchantment spells and Dumbledore being headmaster, it's basically impenetrable. Well, the Grisha in Shadow and Bone have a Hogwarts of their own, the Little Palace. It's the only place where Grisha can truly be safe and protected from those who still aren't fond of the small science they use, or from people who haven't forgotten them for creating the fold in the first place. Ironically, they both happen to be grand castles. To be fair, there is one difference between the two. Harry actually wants to be at Hogwarts, while Alina can't wait to escape the Little Palace. Speaking of Hogwarts, all the wizards who attend are split into 4 houses based on their personalities and ambitions. You have Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff. Grisha, on the other hand, are sorted into orders depending on their powers: Corporalky, Etherealky, and Materialky. In both series, these groups are differentiated by the color of clothing they wear and different crests. In Harry Potter, the main colors are burgundy, green, blue, and yellow. For Shadow and Bone, the colors are blue, red, and purple. Then, the color of their embroidery tells you what their specific abilities are. Basically, the only difference is wizards wear cloaks and Grisha wear keftas. The real question is, who do you think is more powerful?
Not familiar with the concept.
What would a good story be without the strong bonds of friendship? Alina and Mal grew up together in the orphanage and quite literally don't want to live without one another. Sure, towards the end of the season, things may have been getting a little more romantic, but it was first based on a friendship where they would risk their lives for one another. Just like the Golden Trio in Harry Potter, Harry, Hermione, and Ron would do anything to protect one another. Just think about how Hermione and Ron were willing to risk their lives and become fugitives to help Harry find the Horcruxes. None of them would have survived the series without the other. Raise your hand if you think platonic friendships like this are totally underrated in TV and movies.
Do you know what I mean?
No.
Finally, let's talk magic, or how similarly magic works in both series. You might be thinking, what do you mean? Wizards clearly have more versatility in their magic over Grisha. Well, that's kind of true, but they're both limited in the same ways. Grisha cannot create something that doesn't already exist. They can only manipulate the matter around them. The same goes for wizards. Sure, they can accio anything they'd like, but they aren't able to conjure things like money, food, and clothing. Those items must already exist, and if they did summon them, it would be considered stealing. That's why the Weasleys haven't conjured up a vault full of galleons yet. Anyone up for a marathon of these two stories? While the idea for a Shadow and Bone film was scrapped in 2012, we can definitely see why they had originally tied a Harry Potter producer to the story. But despite the similarities, Shadow and Bone and Harry Potter are still uniquely their own. And let's face it, they are probably some of the best fantasy content out there. Did you find any other similarities between the two stories?